Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in Miniature. It is time for me to ramble somewhat coherently, hopefully, about another obscurity in literature. And today's book we're going to look at is Dagger Dagger. Now, once more, I don't know where I originally come across a lot of these things. I believe I first stumbled upon this after the fact that it was kickstarted, which was annoying to begin with. But then when I did discover it and started looking into it and actually taking a look at the Kickstarter page and kind of following up on some of the artists and authors involved in this book, because it's a pretty fat one. And if you're familiar with some of the artists and authors involved here, big fat anthologies are kind of their thing. And I keep thinking, maybe we'll just talk about some of those anthologies, because I honestly have loved anthologies and anthology works for the longest of times, especially when it comes to comic books. I grew up, getting a chance to read a lot of the old EC stuff via reprints, admittedly, but always I loved that, you had lots of different artists bringing different styles. I mean, I had my own personal favorites, and that's always the case. We all do. But it's always cool to see people bringing new and creative ideas to the table. When I first started really getting into collecting comics, which was a very 90s thing to do at the time when I was a kid, older kid, I should say. I mean, I'm still a kid, technically. I mean, it doesn't matter how many years I add on to the current age. But when I was in my teens and really kind of getting into the nitty-gritty, especially of the indie stuff, especially like Post-Image, there were a lot of books like coming out of England, especially anything basically that Pat Mills was involved with, I immediately would be picking up. What was it called? Monster Massacre, Ammo Armageddon. I want to say there was a dinosaur one too, but I don't remember now. Anyway, let's get back to Dagger Dagger. So, one of the things that immediately piqued my interest was that little tagline, and I believe when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, dark fantasy and sci-fi? You got my interest. And then when I started to see who was involved with this book, I want to say it was probably Simon Roy that got me here, and I stayed for a lot of these other artists and ended up kind of following along and digging deeper and checking out some of their work. And I want to say when I recently talked about that Death Fight Forever, I want to say this was after some of those artists originally got involved with that. I can't remember. It was one or the other. It was either through Simon's work or Death Fight Forever. I can't remember which. But anyway. So, where is he? Al Gofa right here is probably the main person to point fingers at for comics like this. Definitely a fan of his thinking and style. Then again, I see Matt Emmons on there as well, who's done a lot of this kind of stuff too. But I mean, all these guys are... It's funny, we don't have like Dojin circles or, like those kind of illustration rings or groups of, professional freelancers that all kind of latch on together and work together like they do in Japan so much. But it's kind of cool to see, like, a lot of these artists always tend to show up in groups and doing things together. And to me, that's always half the fun, is when you discover something new and cool and you gotta get a hold of it. And upon flipping this book, this one pisses me off, speaking of piss. Dark Angels of Darkness, I have been looking for a copy for a reasonable price for a bit now, and I have yet to come across one. And I know that Al had mentioned possibly like a while back doing a reprint of it, and I wish he would, because I'm still annoyed that I don't have a copy. But, seriously, some of this stuff, like I said, First Knife, I've got that somewhere. I know Simon didn't draw it, but nevertheless, very much in his realm of things. And I come to think of it, I think he did do some of the stuff in the background. Static, I have a copy of Static. I don't think I've ever posted it. Lesniewski's got some interesting stuff. Gardner, that's one I've been meaning to pick up too. I have a couple of the X-Mags. We'll have to talk about those too. I figure maybe we'll just turn August into like an anthology month. Anyway, let's get to the actual book. So it's a good, almost 300 pages. It's close. It's not there, but it's pretty close. It's a good 250 plus. And as always is the case with these types of books, you get a lot of different things. Some stories stand out more, some based on the writing, the twist, even just like the sense of pacing and speed. Obviously, with a comic book, the art is going to play into it. Some of the artists I don't care for as much as others, but that's more of a personal take. Some have styles that really kind of click with me. Some don't. And again, that's half the fun of a book like this. I know I got it pretty zoomed in at the moment. One thing that also needs to be mentioned is the printing quality of this thing is great. With artists doing all kinds of interesting, fun things, it helps when the books are stable, sturdy, and, able to keep in one piece. Looks like Emmons art. So yeah, obviously without spoiling too much. This book is definitely in, like the title says, that dark fantasy and sci-fi realm. I think it airs more into the dark fantasy side of things, which is totally fine. This looks really familiar, and I don't know why. Because Al Gofa drew it. That's why it looks kind of familiar to me. I like his stuff. I'm a fan of this kind of thick line, very uniquely styled stuff. If you haven't noticed, some of the recommendations and things that I have had on this channel. Gofa was the one who did Cry Punch, I think. Or at least was responsible for... We'll talk about Cry Punch one of these days, too. It's another big, fat book. I like that not all the artists work in a similar style either. We have some very kind of shoujo-esque manga here looking stuff. I don't remember which artist this was. I'm sorry if I can't recognize everything off the top of my head. Almost gives some Miyazaki-ish vibes, or honestly kind of Nihei to me. It's still Nihei in his use of, empty space, blacks and whites. This looks like the guys that did First Knife. And I like this one because none of the words are actually, well, maybe they are words in some other alphabet that I can't recognize. Some kind of acrylic writing. Obviously we can figure that out, but I like when stories kind of do something different. Now, Linnaeus Derte's story in here. Linnaeus Derte, I believe, is Swedish. I know I've seen some of her books before, and I've got, the Rot one somewhere. You want to talk about Nihei vibes? I think her story, more than anybody else's, gets into that very, at times very Brandon Graham-ish, who I tend to enjoy the work of. But yeah, it does give me some Nihei vibes. I've heard people compare her stuff to like Mobius. I can see that too, but then again I could say that about Graham's work as well. Now, maybe Trakov is the guy that did First Knife, I think. I like this story. I like this kind of wildness. And it really reminds me of, like, maybe if it was in color, something you would have seen, like, in Heavy Metal or something. Which probably will have to. But once I get my copy of Metal Hurlant, I absolutely will be showing that off on here. There's another artist in this book that had a similar style. And I'm probably missing a couple of artists as I'm just, like, flipping through. You do get some very unique looks, and all very competently done. Even the stuff that almost feels more amateurish in its use of, you know, line work and stuff, still has some sense of style and, you know, purpose behind it. I really like this story back here. Again, just the cartoony angularness of it and the various levels as they're all going through here. Jumping to the end. I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like this story was recently colored by Simon Roy, or for Simon Roy with friends of his, and he had republished this. Maybe this is in his most recent book of short stories he was collecting, or maybe he's just posting it again. I don't know. But, like, I swear, just days before posting this, I should say, I came across seeing some of this in color. And I don't know where. Because Roy's work usually is in color. And, I mean, the man is incredibly creative. And again, some very heavy metal Hurlant-esque pages, which absolutely I'm all here for. And as we wrap things up, one of the cool things is we've got where to find all these artists as well, which for somebody like me, who is constantly looking for new things and is always interested in seeing what is coming, even if I'm a few years later, this came out like 21, I believe. It's still nice to have that stuff available. Even if, like I said, trying to track down a copy of Dark Angels of Darkness for a decent price is basically a lost cause at this point. And what's interesting, and I can't speak to the quality of it, I'm assuming it's going to be on a similar level. There is a second volume, Dagger Dagger 2. I don't have that one, but maybe by the time this gets posted, I will have rectified that. We'll see. I will have to keep my eyes peeled on that. I know it exists. I know it is a thing. I just don't own it yet. But like I said, this is one of those kind of great springboards. And for me, stuff like heavy metal, when I was able to get a hold of it, and I'll save that conversation for, well, I think I've already said it. Maybe if you dig out like the old War Machine graphic novel that Heavy Metal put out, I kind of went on a ramble about that there. I know there's videos on it on this channel. In fact, there's just a lot of videos on this channel, period, if you ever want to go down that rabbit hole. But it was kind of that rabbit hole for me of discovering new artists and kind of furthering my interests in, you know, comic books as a medium, as a style of art, something I've always enjoyed. Something I would love to someday be able to give back to in some kind of meaningful way. At least I can sit here and talk about this and I'll have a few hundred people pay attention, which is kind of cool. But, you know, that's one of those things is I've always been very self-conscious and critical of any artwork I've done. And I just don't have the time or patience to sit down anymore to do that. So hopefully I can fix that, and maybe someday you'll see something I can publish in a book like this. That would be kind of cool. But at least in the meantime, there's plenty of other cool artists doing cool stuff like this, so that is something to celebrate. And with that said then, this has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye-bye.